Okay, in our view, flipped classroom strategy is one of the best, where you try to engage students for long-term learning, as we know that a single teacher coming in the class teaching all the topics, and most of the students are not really actively involved in listening to you. So the flipped classroom strategy is that you give and assign topics, rather than you teach, the student teach in the next class, everybody, and then teacher acts like a mentor to align your concept where you really understood or not.
So you mean the student teaches the student?
Yes. Also, and teacher acts like a mentor.
Okay.
This is a flipped classroom strategy.
Okay. Because flipped classroom, we're going to talk about flipped classroom. It means a bit something different, but it's a very good strategy. So what the colleague is saying is, instead of the instructor teaching, every student pick a topic and they lecture about that particular topic. So students are learning from each other, right? Do you face any challenge with this strategy?
Well, initially, yes. Most of the students are reluctant to do kind of homework at home. They don't really find time to prepare the topic that you have assigned to them.
Okay.
But yes, in long term, they really find it interesting.
But how did you overcome that? I mean, students who will come and they haven't prepared their topic.
Constant engagement.
Constant
so we try to motivate them.
So you put them on spots.
Yes.
You know, you come and you present.
Yes.
Okay.
It's not like presenting. It's like they can tell, rather than having a seminar strategy that we also discussed in our group, we can assign a group of students to prepare a topic, or a topic which is good enough for a single student to prepare. So in that there is a sense of competition. Students who are good, they really like to be the first ones presenting, so that the other students, so it's kind of a, you can say, emergence in the class that learning starts.
It's actually a very good strategy that our colleague just proposed. What he's saying is that every student before the class, they're assigned a topic, they have to go and learn about the topic, so basically it's part of their homework assignment, and then when they come into the class, they actually discuss with peers, and students have the opportunity to actually, you know, ask questions and so forth. Now obviously, one of the things with every active learning strategy, students are always reluctant at the beginning. And sometimes you have to put a small carrot to motivate them. It might be a grade, it might be whatever it is, but you will have this issue of resistance with almost every technique that you will try, but it's a very good strategy. He called it flipped learning. Usually flipped learning means something else, but as long as we understand what you mean, that's fine. Yes, so we're going to hear from the group over there.
I mean, the first strategy is like what they have discussed.
Okay.
Like,
what is the next one?
He has suggested that we can assign group assignments based on the lecture topics.
Okay.
So it is again going back to the same thing that
Right.
assign the group assignments based on what has already been lectured, so that they can understand and get involved in the class.
Okay.
And another one is just as you mentioned, that providing marks for class participation.
Okay.
If someone is asking you a question, you give them 1 mark.
Okay. We'll talk about this mark participation in a bit, because it is very risky when you start going through accreditation. When you say you give a grade for participation, sometimes some universities give up to 15% or 20% attendance in participation. And I say, first of all, you cannot give a grade for attendance because it's not linked to any learning outcome. And it doesn't mean that students have learned if they came and they sat on a chair. The second thing is, when you say participation, my question always comes back, and I'm asking the faculty and the administrator, how do you evaluate participation? It cannot be a subjective thing. And if you have a class of 5, 10 students, you might be able to remember who asked what and all. But if you had a class of 80 students over 16 weeks, and you say, I'm giving the grade at the end of the semester.
Excuse me, madam, let me interrupt you here. Actually, when we talk about the class participation, it's not just the attendance. For example, I put some question
I understand that.
That if you can solve this,
yes,
then
you get a point. Yes, I understand it. I'm saying in some instances, people give for attendance. So giving a grade for attendance is not a good practice. If you give a grade for participation,
in our system, we have like, if the student do not have like 75% of the attendance, he cannot sit in the exam.
He gets a warning and he cannot, yes, that's everywhere, that's everywhere, yes.
Exclude.
Yes, that's everywhere.
We have many other ways, like sometimes I do oral examination.
Okay,
I call every student myself into my office because
yes. As long as, sir, you have a process and it's not a subjective thing. It's not like at the end of the semester, you come and you say, well, I'm going to give students, you know, I'm going to curve, I have a curve.
it's not the
Yeah.
because it's the evaluation system.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you, there are techniques, and because we're going to talk about technology, we're going to talk about ways where you can use qualitative and quantitative criteria using a rubric to evaluate student individual contribution throughout the semester.
Yes, we should separate evaluation with the learning. Learning
Right.
is something else.
Yes.
And evaluation is something different.
Okay, I'm just talking about the grade. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to hear from that class table, and then we're going to move to the ladies section. The medical table, I think, because we have a medical doctor. Yes, please.
So the first strategy we came up was with the problem-based learning.
Problem-based learning.
And integrated with that was the brainstorming and Socratic
Okay.
questioning.
Okay.
You want the further strategies or you want to?
No, tell us, are there any challenges when you implement problem-based learning?
Yeah,
So that's in the classroom problems. You engage students in
We do
solving
it in
problems.
small groups. Actually.
Okay. So ladies, what they're saying is that they are actually using problem-based learning in the classroom, putting students in small groups and involving them in solving a problem. Yes? Are there any challenges that you face?
So the most common challenge we face is that the prior knowledge. which
The
they
prior
have
knowledge of
is
students.
Really good enough to build upon sometimes.
Okay.
That's one issue.
So one of the challenges is yes, what else?
The second thing is, of course, the training of the facilitators. I mean, people need to be really trained on how to handle the small groups. So that's
Okay.
one challenge which we have.
Okay. So you use students as facilitators?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Okay.
But
Okay.
we use people who are not of the same specialty.
Okay.
So the case might be dermatology, but the facilitator
Okay.
might be a cardiologist. So there's
Fine.
a bit of a challenge over there.
Okay.
And how we are trying to overcome that is by improving the preparatory year. So that
The preparatory year.
the basic
Okay.
knowledge is slightly better so that they can build upon that.
So one of the things the colleagues have said is that they involve students in small group for problem solving, and basically the major issue they face is the incoming skills of students, that, you know, the background, they don't sometimes have the problem solving skills that are needed for them to be able to participate. So one thing they try to do is to feed into the prep year so that they are prepared with those skills that are needed later on. Okay, so we'll hear from the ladies' side. We'll hear from this group over here.
There is one strategy.
Yes.
It's a 2-minute teaching after introducing one concept. Works with me, especially in programming classes.
Okay.
After I lecture for 10 minutes.
Okay.
After that, I give the students for 2 minutes to teach each other
Okay.
about the concept.
So she uses 2 minutes teaching. Every 10-15 minutes she lectures. She gives students 2 minutes and asks them to teach a concept to their peers. And you found it works well for you?
Yes.
Any challenge that you face? Students are willing to teach each other and all?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Yes? Then?
Sometimes we try to apply it for another course, it will be very difficult.
Right.
Because when you sometimes explain a definition of concept and try to let someone who has just heard that to repeat it, sometimes it will be
Yeah.
confused and wrong and full of mistakes.
I mean, let me tell you something. One thing is that it is always good to actually get the student to apply something when it's still fresh in their mind. And research shows that actually students memorize or remember, retain things more when you ask them to immediately apply them. There are techniques that are not maybe called the 2 minutes teaching, but there are methods like think, pair, share. There are methods like 1 minute paper that you engage students immediately after giving them a dose of instruction. And it helps you as an instructor to ensure that the students have understood properly what you have told them. And they don't walk away from your class with any misconception and misunderstanding. So if you did a 1 minute paper, and we'll talk about the 1 minute paper in a while, and you found out that half of your students missed the end, it means that maybe they haven't understood initially what was asked for them. Now, just a second. Now, every strategy has a context. يعني every strategy, when you're picking the strategy, something that works in humanities might not work in medical field, something that works. Obviously, one of the best strategies to engage students and student love is role playing. If you're teaching a course in statistics and mathematics, role playing might not be a good strategy. So there are parameters, you cannot come and say there is one size fits all. But as a professor, you know about all these strategies and you come and say, okay, this will work in my context. Sometimes you will pick some strategies, you will find some are working more than others. But you will have to experiment. There is no one size, what works for me might not work for you, even if we're teaching the same course. Because our style is different, the students we have are different, and so forth and so forth. Okay? What else?
Just one.
Just one.
I use debate.
Debates.
Yes, debates. I divided the students to groups. Two groups. Every group has the same topic. Two groups they have the same topics.
Okay.
And they discussion between them.
Okay.
The topics, and the challenge between them is too hard.
Okay.
But
The students find it difficult.
yeah, so the difficulty is
Okay.
culture of the students.
So how do you overcome that?
Refuse that.
Okay. Now, what our colleague is saying is debates. And structured debates is actually a very good technique to develop student critical thinking skills, student analytical skills. So if you have learning outcomes about critical thinking and analytical skills in the subject that you are teaching, obviously, you can use structured debate. The challenge with structured debate are two things usually. One is that it requires faculty to prepare, to think about a topic that would be good for debate, in line with the learning outcomes that they are trying to achieve out of the course. So it would mean preparation, preparing guidelines for students, and so. The second thing, normally for a debate to have value, it will need that students do some homework on researching a topic. You just don't want to come and say, I agree, I disagree. You agree, disagree scientifically. What are the evidence? Why do you agree? What kind of support evidences do you have? So debates are a very, very good technique, and students love it once they know how to use it. But at the beginning, obviously, students don't know it, and that's very important. Remember, we are going to graduate these students who are going to have at some point to put proposals, to defend their ideas, to present concepts, and then we'll be facing people who will not agree with them. And they have to be confident to be able to justify, not just be stubborn, but to justify their decision and to back up their decision. So debates are very, we'll talk about debates more in a bit. So thank you very much. There was lots of good strategies. Yes, just because of the sake of time.
Okay, just a
yes, please.
Your activity can be seen here. You follow the strategy of
group discussion.
You have
yes.
the challenge that
the time is the group is too big. Exactly. Now you would have as a professor 3 competitive advantages over you. First of all, you're not seeing your students once and disappear. Second, you can grade your students and you have the carrot that you can give them that they all want. The third thing, we're colleagues here and peers. We are at equal level. I'm not your professor, and you're not my students. We are colleagues and I'm facilitating the session. And the fourth thing is that you all come from different backgrounds. All your students in the course, they come, but people in medical school want different things from people in vet, want different things from people in humanities and so forth. So obviously, these are parameters we have to take into account, but you can see that the one reason usually when we do these workshops with smaller groups, we have lots of activities, and we practice role play and debate and so, because we have the luxury of time. Now obviously we have to work, and this is why the kind of activities I do with a group of 60 for 3 hours and a half would be different than if I had a group of 25 over 2 days, right? And that's one parameter you have to take into account. Now, I just want you to raise your hand. What do you typically do in the classroom? What is the percentage of time when you lecture? How many of you lecture for 70% of the time of the lecture? Raise your hand. 70%. 70% of your time you lecture. Those who lecture for 50% of their time, raise your hand. 50. Those who lecture for less than 50%, raise your hand. Now, of course, in practical fields, it would be, in programming and so forth, it would be different. Those who lecture more than 80%. Okay. Now, obviously you will see there is no one percentage of how much you should be lecturing. Nobody can come and tell you should lecture 50% and you should. It depends on so many different parameters. And lectures are still important. But in many places people say, in our part of the world, professors only lecture. Well, let me tell you, this issue of lecturing is not just in our part of the world. It's an international phenomenon. And that's why this whole thing about active learning. I was very interested to read a study a couple of months back from Boston University, which is one of the leading universities in the United States. And it did a study on their faculty in the College of Public Health. And they asked the faculty, typically, how do you spend your time in the classroom? And what you can see, 60% spend their time in the class lecturing. And it's a College of Public Health. 10% involve students in independent work, students working on their own in the time of the class. You give them an assignment or an exam or a quiz or whatever it is. 15% is allocated for students working in group. And 15% is other, which means they might be doing some maybe exams or something else or some discussions or recaps or whatever it is. So this is a general phenomenon. Now, what is the problem with this? You know what the problem is? The problem is that research says that our human brain learns better when we are engaged in doing things. You might have seen this. This is called the pyramid of learning. And what research says throughout the years is that as human beings, we only remember 10% of what we read. So if you were giving students to read some notes and all, they will only retain 10% of what they've read. We retain 20% of what we hear. So if I was talking to you and there were no slides at the back and nothing, I would be talking all day long and you will only walk out of 20%. That's it. But as humans, we remember 30% of what we see. So if you're using some visual aids or you're doing some demonstration, students would remember 30%. We remember 50% of what we see and hear. And this is why people use PowerPoints and other visual aids, because hopefully you will remember 50% of what I say. I know I talk a lot, so we can reduce it to 40, that's fine. So this whole bit is usually what we call passive learning, which means students are recipients of knowledge, just like what's happening now, right? So that's passive learning. The minute you want to implement active learning, why we want to implement it is because people remember 90% of what they actually do and 70% of what they say and write. So when you're explaining a bit of some new knowledge to your student and you get them to work in a small group and discuss, they will probably, because they have talked about it, remember 70% of what you have told them. If you involve them in doing a role play or in practicing something, they will remember 90% of it. And this is the reason why we're saying there's nothing wrong with the lecture, but the lecture on its own is not going to help, because the retention rate from the lecture is only 50%. And that is why we have to provide opportunities for students to be able to implement what you have taught them.